Alright, so let's assume that you want a little bit more control over your AI ambient occlusion because this is maybe not quite the values that you want for your stuff. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to render for my perspective shape because it's going to be more fun and interesting to look at. And let's assume that we want to do some more work on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and assign these a new material and just use a regular AI matte shader. If I can find it. AI matte, there we go. So basically by default that's going to be black. If you wanted to make it a different color, it's just going to make all your stuff white. This is basically actually what an ambient occlusion shader is, just with some extra junk thrown in there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hop into my hypershade, and we basically just need a way to plug the ambient occlusion into here. So I'm going to look at my AI matte shader, I'm going to click on this dude, plop this down here, and this is going to show you all of the different options and what is plugged in or out of this shader, which in this case is nothing right now. So if we hit tab and start typing AI ambient occlusion, you will get an ambient occlusion node, which you can use and basically just plop the out color into the color of your ambient occlusion shader, and it should pretty much just recreate an ambient occlusion shader. This is all that really is for the most part. They just have a specific shader, so you don't need to do this manually. However, we want the extra level of control, so what we gotta do is hit tab again, and this is my preferred way of doing it. There's other ways you can modify color, but I hate them, frankly. So I'm gonna go with a ramp texture. And what you need to do, expand this little doodle. In this case, this is asking for a single color, not RGB values, so just grab a random value from this, plop it into VChord. You can do UChord, you'll just need to change the type of ramp. So VChord saves you a click. And then grab your out color. If we're using out color red, you should probably use red again, but it doesn't like super matter, to be honest. And then just plop that into there. Actually, wait, sorry. Out color, you can just plug in the whole out color. I'm being a goober, I don't know what I'm doing. So by default, this should look pretty much exactly the same. Where this becomes fun is it allows you to change the color values. So if you wanted your ambient occlusion shadows to be bright blue, you can do that. Which is, you know, really fun for something, I guess. But in this case, what it allows you to do is crunch down on the values and make basically like crispier shadows if you were to want them. So it's just giving me like more dramatic shadows here. If I wanted to shadow other stuff, I could add in, you know, more black on the highlights, which in this case doesn't really make any sense at all, but it will give you a very trippy effect if that's for some reason what you're going for. You can also use this to make some wonky Toon Shader-esque effects by setting the interpolation of this to none. And what that will do is basically give you, for the most part, it'll give you like much crispier shadows. But let's say that like if I wanted to color this person sort of weird gradient of like yellow to orange, find an orange, yellow to orange, and then you could have some like bright yellow highlights or something on this character. That is a weird way to do it, but you can see it does sort of work. So you can totally recolor your ambient occlusion shaders like this. In this case, I basically just want the sort of generic black and white thing that I had before, and I would like this to be, you know, some smoother interpolation. And of course, if you don't want the ambient occlusion to be as aggressively dark, you can always just make it a little bit less aggressively dark. In this case, I'm just going to say I can do that in Photoshop if I really want to. So, AO, darker, PNG. And the other thing that I should actually do is double check and make sure that there should be more of a shadow on the ground plane. Like, the fact that there's not is actually a little bit odd, which leads me to believe that my ground plane might be actually clipping gently through my character, because if it wasn't, we would get that nice sort of crispy little shadow on the bottom like we have here. And that's like what I was looking for, and I was like, why do we not have this? And that usually will be, again, if you're flipping through an object, it doesn't do that. So in this case, I'm just gonna temporarily defile my ground plane and just leave it like this. Go back into my render cam shape, and now we have this more aggressive ambient occlusion map, which probably should have edited for my actual render cam. Save this out again as AO darker PNG. Please, yes, do replace. Alright, so let's go and just plop that back into Photoshop for like the 90th time. Cool. And then we're gonna go ahead and do a multiply layer. And in this case, it's being a little bit weird because it's like registering stuff showing up in the background. So if you wanted to just sort of get rid of that, my very janky way to do that in this particular image, because it's very sort of stylized is you can just sort of go through with like a little painty layer and just sort of get rid of some of that like extra gray. That'll kind of fix some of the issues and just come back in and just, oops, hello. And then just make sure that it's actually showing up like on the head properly and that, you know, for this image works. Obviously you don't want to do this with like 8,000 different things, but for this, whatever. But yeah, so this has been a very bad compositing tutorial because this thing looks pretty weird. It doesn't sit great in the scene in terms of the colors, but that's because, I don't know, I chose like a really weird way to color this because I'm a spaz. But yeah, so hopefully some of this rambling tutorial was helpful to somebody. Maybe. Fingers crossed.